I think the other thing that's been, that God has blessed is this desire to send people out. We're not trying to create a country club or some kind of large gathering just for us, but we really are praying that God allows us to see the nations reached. So we raise up a lot of leaders who it's painful, but we send them out.
Hi, I'm James Forrest, and this is XP Leadership. If you're an executive pastor, you already know this is one of the most demanding and least visible roles in the church. Each episode, we hear from XPs across the country about what's actually working, navigating growth, managing pressure, leading teams, and staying healthy in the process. No fluff, just real conversations about life and leadership. Executive pastors rarely get the microphone, so this is where they do. And their perspective is too valuable to miss. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm James Forrest. Welcome to XP Leadership, where we talk about all things executive pastor. If you're an executive pastor, you are loved and you are in the right spot. I am thrilled today to have my very good friend and executive pastor from the Summit Church, David Thompson, to join us. David, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
For those that don't know you personally, like I do, tell us a little bit about who you are personally and professionally.
Yeah. Well, my claim to fame is I'm friends with James Forrest, and we have been friends for a long time, been neighbors for the last 10 years. Been grateful for that and your friendship. I've been married for 26 years. I've been in ministry for about 30 years. First 10 years served as a student pastor, and then have really kind of served in this capacity as an executive pastor for the last, almost 20 years. And I have 4 kids. Our oldest graduated from Chapel Hill, and she is now on staff with us in Summit College.
Go Heels.
That's right. Our second daughter just graduated from NC State. Go Pack. And she is going to grad school for speech pathology. And then we have 2 boys, one that just finished his freshman year at Chapel Hill, and then a rising junior still at home.
Well, in the soft dad rankings, I think you're number 1 in my book. David is a wonderful husband and dad that I've seen from down the street and as his friend over the last 20 years. So we'll get into how you balance that with being, an executive pastor at one of the largest, fastest growing churches in the country. But let's talk about the XP role. Let's talk about what you do at Summit. I'd love to hear your version of kind of your tenure there and how that role may have changed over the last couple decades.
Sure. Yeah. I came here as the student pastor. I had served in student ministry for 8 or so years. And JD, our pastor here, called me and asked if I'd be a student pastor. And I'd kind of already moved out of that a little bit. I was an associate pastor down there in Augusta, Georgia. And after going back and forth with him, ended up coming up here for student pastor position, served in that capacity for about 18 months before hiring a different guy. And then moved into what I would consider like an education kind of pastor, where I was kind of giving leadership to the kids ministry, the student ministry, small groups, missions, stuff like that. And then JD called me into his office 3 or 4 years in and said, "Hey, I want you to be my executive pastor." And I literally had no idea what that meant. So this is a true story. I went back. I was too insecure in my leadership at the time to tell him, I don't even know what that means. I've never heard of that role. So I went back into my office. I had read this book by Eric Geiger on Simple Church. And I remember seeing his title was executive pastor. So I emailed him immediately. And that afternoon, he graciously replied back and sent me his job description. So I changed his name to my name, took it back into JD's office and said, I think this is what I should do. And he kind of gave it a cursory glance, said, great, do that. And I've been figuring it out ever since. I I would say that when I first started, it was just an extension of kind of the education kind of pastor, a traditional education pastor kind of role,
Right.
heavily focused on the ministry areas. Still, I never have filled the role of CFO or, I've done a lot of the HR kind of stuff, but I was more geared towards the ministry side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I, kind of gave leadership to the staff at that time. Now, 21 years in, my role is to lead the executive team. And so we have a team of about 12 people on our executive team. And so I give leadership to that. And I'm not specifically over a ministry area of the church.
Right. So I know you know a lot of executive pastors. You understand the importance of being in community with other executive pastors, having peer groups, going to conferences. I know you lead a lot of other XPs through the Summit Collaborative and things like that. So you get kind of this bird's eye view with executive pastors. In your opinion, what are the most critical issues facing executive pastors today?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I talk with a lot of them, probably the biggest thing I hear is tension, struggles with their senior pastor.
Yeah.
And then combined with that is just this sense of isolation that they really don't have anybody they can talk to about that. They can't talk to anybody in their church.
Right.
They have the person they're struggling with is their boss. And so that's probably been the thing I hear the most recently over the last 3 or 4 years, is that the combination of just feeling isolated in that position and not really having a peer, but not being able to, talk to people on the team about what's going on with their struggle with their senior pastor.
Yeah. What's your response to both of those? When you hear somebody say, "Hey, I've got you a senior pastor," and or you observe that they are isolated, what's your advice to those folks?
Well, I mean, it's oftentimes encouraging them to have honest conversations,
Mm-hmm.
and the reality is that my relationship with my senior pastor, JD, I tell people, and this is not false humility, a lot of the success of that is based on his, ability to lead well.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a dynamic in which you're kind of relying on the senior pastor to lead well. And so if he's not, or if there's tension there, you have to be able to have the courage to have an honest conversation. I think there's an element of that relationship that is just so heavily dependent upon trust.
Yeah.
And there are ways in which you can build trust in a relationship. And so I talk with them through that. And that could be anywhere. I remember when I first started, one of the things I did is I went into JD's office and I said, "Hey, tell me the top 3 things that are frustrating you about our church right now. If you could change 3 things, what would they be?" And he told me what those were, and it was my mission that year to make sure those 3 things were better by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And so there's an element in which I was trying to instill trust in him that I could get a job done and I could take some things off of his plate and make his job easier and the church better, and care about the things that he cares about.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me. I appreciate you leading with that. I think it's a really honest answer, and you're right. A lot of people won't talk about it, and you actually see some parallels in the business world. Typically, there's a lot of tension between the CEO, who's typically a salesperson generating revenue, top line up and to the right, and then you've got the CFO or COO in the business world, kind of the executive pastor in church land. Kind of worried about the back end, stewarding all the opportunity, right? With staff and culture and operations and risk. And oftentimes those things are in tension. When you get into a room and you're talking through something, sometimes those values, which both propel the organization forward, are in tension. And if you don't have that foundation of trust, it can get tricky.
Yeah, very much so.
Talk to me about the isolation piece. I know you see some of that too. I am surprised. I get to work with hundreds of XPs around the country. I would say anecdotally, 75% of them aren't in a peer group, not at conferences, not in community, outside maybe their small group, but with other executive pastors. Talk to me about the isolation piece.
Yeah, I think it's something that is kind of missed because I think most people think of the senior leadership as the senior pastor, and that's very true. And but I think there traditionally over the last several years have been there's a little bit more support for the senior pastor, and that can come from the church, naturally thinking about the senior pastor to, the elders thinking about the senior pastor, and somehow the executive pastor kind of gets lost in the shuffle of that. And so again, by God's grace, I'm not experiencing this, so
Sure.
I don't feel like this is a
Yeah.
confessional,
Yeah.
but it's a reality, and I have felt it at times for sure.
Right.
But I think the thing that we're trying to do is recognize that we need to really develop future executive pastors, and create a farm system for executive pastors. When I went to seminary, that was not something that people were training for.
Sure.
There's not a lot of development in that space. I think that we also need to provide that kind of support, and we are trying to create some cohorts and kind of groups to be able to encourage and coach and counsel fellow executive pastors. So I do think that's a real piece of that we're trying to address, and something that we've recognized the need.
Yeah, man, it's so easy to feel alone, right? I mean, that's one of the greatest lies of the enemy, no matter what context you're talking about, is that you're alone and you're uniquely, by yourself in some sort of circumstance or moment. It's just not true, and so rubbing elbows
Right.
with other executive pastors is so important. We have had the privilege of being a part of the Summit Church for a long time and seen a lot of growth, and salvations and baptisms and church plants and missionaries and all these amazing things. And you've been in the seat for a while. Can you point to a few things? And I'm sure this is an hour-long presentation, so it's a challenge to get it, down into a digestible format. But what are some key principles that you would pull out of your tenure here that have led to that type of growth?
I get asked that question a lot, and I never want to move past quickly. Just evidence of God's grace and a lot of prayer, and just a move of the Spirit that I don't think anybody could have expected. And when I moved here over 20 years ago, the vision of the church at that time was to grow to about 1,200 people and have one large campus, and see God do great things there. I don't think anybody could have imagined what God's done. When I think about some of the things that have remained consistent, it is that element of just seeking God in prayer and really being dependent upon the Holy Spirit to lead and move. I think that there's been a kind of focus on the mission over kind of preferences, and we saw that. You hear stories from early on when JD got here. There were 300 people here, and he tells the story of a couple people that were still here that were not really excited about some of the changes that were taking place, and yet once they started seeing people get saved, and JD tells the story of an African American who got saved, and an older man in the church that had been here well before JD got here came up to him with tears in his eyes and said, hey, I'm not real excited about all that you're doing here, but if we keep getting that and the baptisms keep getting full like that, you can count me in for all of it. And so I think there's just been a desire to see God move and a willingness to set aside preferences. I think the other thing that's been, that God has blessed is this desire to send people out, and that we're not trying to create a country club or some kind of large gathering just for us, but we really are praying that God allows us to see the nations reached. And so we raise up a lot of leaders who, it's painful, but we send them out. And I think God's just blessed that. I think that's been something that's been from early on a kind of value of ours, that we're going to, what we say is send our best. And so we have just a leadership factory that we're trying to create, that allows us to send people to plant churches and people to go on mission. Um, and I think that the two things I would say, the things that attracted me to this church, was the gospel is preached and we are on mission. And so I think those kind of sum up a little bit of what I'm trying to describe in terms of those other things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been at the church almost 25 years, and it's so in the culture, it's so in the DNA, in the water, that it's sometimes hard to kind of actually succinctly, as you just did, talk about what it is. I mean, prayer, set aside preferences, missional, gospel. And man, I grew up Southern Baptist, and I feel like that whole experience was an experience in preferences, right? We're really good at preferences and arguing about sometimes some non-material issues, and that's such a distraction from the greatest, commandment to go, and the Great Commission.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, man, there's just been so much growth when you've been in this seat. Can you think of an example of a time where, it's human nature to kind of think of, hey, this is working. Whatever we're doing here is working, and we'll just keep doing that thing, and it'll be okay. But in business and in the church world, you pivot when circumstances warrant it. So has there been a situation that you can think of where, hey, this process or technique or approach is really working brilliantly, but now that we're here, we're a different size or different focus, this is not working anymore?
Larry Osborne is a pastor out in California, and he wrote this book called Sticky Teams, and it's been kind of a pivotal kind of book for us. Critical. The idea that he has in there that we've kind of grasped onto is that, a church moves through different stages, and as they move through different stages, they have to adapt to different complexities. And so one of the things he talks about is, when a church starts, it's usually like a track star, and a track star is kind of out there on his own, for the most part. He may want to run a relay, but for the most part, he's out there by himself. And then he moves to, then you move to a golf team where you've got 3 or 4 buddies that you're really close to. It's pretty easy to have conversations. It's easy to catch up on what's going on. Then you move to a basketball team, and the basketball team has a little bit more complexities because now you've got different positions. You've got offense, defense, you've got inbound plays and things like that. And then ultimately you move to a football team where you've got, offense, defense, special teams. You've got assistant coaches. Sometimes the offense and defense are not even practicing at the same place or the same time, and different coaches meetings and things like that. And so as I think about that question, that's kind of what I think about, is that we have experienced just the complexities that come with growth. And what worked when we were a golf team, so to speak, of just kind of knowing everybody's, what's going on, and the DNA and the vision just being easily caught because you're rubbing shoulders, you're kind of constantly talking about it. Now with a very complex football team, what we've realized is that we have to document things. It takes a lot more time to communicate clearly. We have to come up with a more robust kind of strategic plan that gets everybody informed and involved and kind of knows what's going on. And so if I had to answer that question, that's probably what I think about, is kind of how we have moved from just that very simple
Yeah.
kind of communication to a very complex organization, and had to learn how to, and we're still learning how to effectively lead a larger team and communicate well and get everybody aligned.
Going back to like college at seminary, I know you got your doctoral degree. Like, do you think seminaries generally prepare, let's talk about executive pastors only, for some of those challenges, or is that things you just have to learn with experience?
It's a lot of learning with experience.
Yeah.
And I kind of joke with people. I'm very grateful for the education I got, but sitting here today in the role that I'm in,
Yeah.
I would have probably been better served if I'd gone to like business school, maybe law school, because we're dealing with lawyers so much. If I'd done some stuff in PR and communications, and but I think I do think there's an element in which, some element of business education should be, added to the seminary education.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I tell people, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, it's a little bit exaggeratory to make the point, but I think like 98% of what I do every day is stuff that I learned in my career, not at law school. Now, law school teaches you how to think like a lawyer and all these, soft skills, which I think are really important and not to be undervalued. But it is interesting how much of whatever we're talking about is learned on the job. And so, creating practical, courses and internships and externships, and whether it's seminary or law school, I think is just super important.
To that end, one of the things that we are really trying to focus on is kind of that, what we call the Summit Institute, kind of a residency program. And I think what you're seeing in a lot of churches is that kind of development where they are recognizing there's a deficiency of leaders, and the traditional seminary model is not getting it completely done. I still think there's great value in traditional seminaries, and I hope they continue to provide services. But what I think a lot of churches are recognizing is a need for additional training, those kinds of internships and residencies and mentorships, trying to involve businessmen from the church into that. And so I think there's a great need for that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're touching on one of my personal passions, right? Which is, a passion for the capital C church to have business excellence, right? I mean, one of the things I saw early in my career is if you just compare my business clients to my nonprofit clients, that inevitably there was a lack of business acumen and excellence in the nonprofit clients. Now that's changed dramatically over the last 20 years. And I feel like we have been a small part of that, which I'm really grateful for. But, the level of excellence, and you don't want to go too far the other way too, right? I mean, you don't want to lose the ministry aspect of a church. And I think Summit does a really good job of this. It's a large church, right? There's going to be infrastructure and layers and, some level of bureaucracy. At the same time, I think that going back to the culture, there's still this culture of presence and being with people and community and all the things that are really the core and essence of ministry and Jesus's ministry. So it's a tough balance, man. It's a tough balance because you don't want to go too far one way or the other, and it's a little bit of a unique thing over the last 20 years with the growth of the megachurch.
Yeah, I'll throw this in there more humorous, but the other thing I tell people about the executive pastor role is there's this tension between the two things. There's an executive function of it, and there's also a pastoral kind of function of it. And so I think that's kind of what you're describing, is just recognizing that, yes, there is still very much a spiritual, gospel-centered kind of focus of the ministry, but we also want to do things with excellence. And there's some business kind of elements that have to be employed in the church.
Yeah. This is something my wife talks about a lot. There's ditches on both sides of the road, and sometimes it's in the middle of that tension is where like the sweet spot is. So yeah,
right.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's talk again, backing out to thinking about executive pastors across the country and kind of what you're seeing. If I said, hey, what's one blind spot? And this is a gross generalization, not applied to everybody, but what's one blind spot that's possible that XPs have as a group?
Yeah. This was a tough question for me to think through. I'm not really sure I know the answer to it. I think if I was trying to answer for myself, um, is just just a probably going back to what we just talked about. There's a blind spot in me that will oftentimes surface because I feel like, oh, we've done this before. I know how to execute on this. I know, the answer. I'll provide the solution. And my blind spot is that it's a little bit more self-reliant than, kind of spirit-led.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, going back to that kind of tension that we are just talking about, I think that there is an element in the church where, and I think it's also true in business as well, but the just a spirit-led kind of leadership that allows you to employ some of those kinds of practical things, but still being led by the Spirit. So that's probably more me than nationally, but
Yeah.
that's kind of a personal struggle of mine, I would say.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being somewhat vulnerable with that. I think that's really helpful for folks to hear. We talked about, I'll throw one out there. We talked about isolation, right? Earlier, and kind of the lack of being in peer groups and cohorts and things like that, so that's probably, maybe another one, but I appreciate you saying that and being honest about that. I mean, it's human nature, you've been there, done that. It's easy just to throw out an answer via email and become so self-reliant. Even if you started in a good place, that's just how our nature, and the enemy works.
Right.
Let's talk about hard conversations. I'm sure you've had a hard conversation or two in your tenure in this role. Any way you want to take it, what maybe is an example of a hard conversation that XPs need to have, they tend to not have? Any advice on leaning in, leaning out, bias for action, inaction, etc.?
Yeah. Well, I think the obvious answer is performance-based kinds of conversations. And I think the struggle with churches is we are oftentimes we lean a little bit too far into the ditch, as you say, of grace, and we extend grace longer than maybe we should, and we think that we're doing it out of grace when oftentimes it's out of fear of just having a hard conversation.
Yeah.
And addressing something that needs to be addressed. So I think that's probably the first thing that pops to my mind in terms of what a hard conversation looks like. But I also think there's an element of just wisdom in knowing when to and how to have that conversation. But I think the other thing that I would say is that there are conversations that come with people who are doing a good job, but just need to be steered in a slightly different direction or put in a different seat. And sometimes those are hard. I'm having a conversation right now with somebody on our executive team who is awesome, is doing a great job, but I'm having to really think through, is this the best use of your gifts and your strengths? And you may need to give up some things in order to clear your space, clear your head, and clear your time and your space to be able to lead in the capacity that it maximizes your gifts and your strengths. And those are hard. I mean, it's hard to give something up that you love, but I want to make sure that we're thinking what's best for the whole organization.
Yeah. Yeah, again, very similar in business and nonprofit world. You're right. No one likes to have hard conversations, but if we had zero hard conversations, the organization really wouldn't grow and move forward. You would just really stagnate. And so there's an organizational development piece to having hard conversations sometimes. There's also a legal piece. I don't want to take it legal too much, but one of the fact patterns we get pretty regularly is, hey, we want to terminate somebody. Why? They're not performing. Okay, great. send me the performance reviews. Oh, we don't have any, right? And so that has the potential to turn south. And then sometimes they'll send us the performance reviews and they're glowing,
Right.
because we're too nice to have a hard conversation or to write it down. And so that can create legal exposure unnecessarily. So, again, ditches on both sides of the road. You don't want to be the guy that's walking around having hard conversations all day, every day. At the same time, you can't be led by fear and not have them.
Right. Yes. And quite frankly, you guys have slapped our wrists enough times on that I think we're finally getting it. And, our team is learning, hey, if I feel like something is wrong, I need to, have that hard conversation. I need to document it. I need the HR to be involved.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's a little bit of an A/B. I mean, I don't want to escalate legal to the most important. I actually think it's the organizational development piece that is the most important, right? Because it doesn't serve anybody at an organization, the employee or the organization, for someone to be in the wrong seat.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's quite frankly, a lot of what I do is try to, get people in the right seat, freed up to lead in their strengths. And, we're fortunate enough in a larger church, you're able to kind of specialize on some things. You don't have to be as much of a generalist in the job that you have. And so that's a lot of what I do, is try to put people in the right seats on the bus.
Do you feel like that's a gut reaction? I read you as a very observant person. Like, I feel like you pick up on a lot of things that other people don't pick up on. What do you think leads you to some of those decisions? Hey, I see you're here, but I think you can go here. I think you're really good at that, but do you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, thanks. I think that it's some of the way in which God's wired me. And as people do those kinds of life mapping exercises, I've done pieces of that. I haven't gotten to the final conclusion of being able to state in one sentence what my life purpose is. But if I had to, this is what I would say, is that God has gifted me in the ability of identifying gifts and passions in people to be able to lead a team and build a team. And so some of it's just the way God's wired me, I think. I do try to get to know people. I mean, and I think as well, James, there's some skill in it that I am able to kind of pass on to people. For instance, one of the things that I'll do is, if I'm talking with a younger leader, I'll just have them write out an ideal job description, or what would an ideal job description be in 2 to 3 years, and let's talk about what that is, and then figure out, okay, you're right here today. You want to be here in 3 years. What are we going to do in that gap? What are we going to do with content? What kind of content are we going to give you to read and be exposed to? What kind of experiences are we going to give you to be able to, kind of try things out? And then as you're getting those experiences, we also want to provide some coaching and really, give you feedback and evaluation to help you get better. And so I do think that, it's gracious of you to say that, but I do think that's some of how I'm wired, but I also think that there are some skills that God has, allowed me to employ.
The one time I had a little bit of an issue with it is when you were the head coach of our, 6-year-old kids soccer team, and all of a sudden I got deemed to be the assistant coach. That was clearly not in my calling, or head coach when you didn't show up. So, but I'm glad to hear you're good at it at scale.
Sometimes it's the ministry of absence that allows other people to step up in their leadership.
I appreciate that. So let's talk about campuses and operational leadership. So obviously Summit is huge. How do you balance alignment with the central vision that you talked about eloquently earlier, with giving some level of autonomy to the folks that are out there at the campus and the ministry leads?
Yeah. Well, I would say that's something that's kind of a tension we are always managing. And I don't know that we've gotten it completely right, but I'll tell you some things that we have done to try to instill the DNA and make sure the DNA is present at all of our campuses. We have 13 campuses around Raleigh-Durham, and the couple things that we do, the first thing I talk about when I talk about this is we stole this from Seacoast years ago, 15 plus years ago. They had iPods. We call them ePods, and the ePods are, essentially things that are essential, things that are priorities, things that are optional, and things that are discouraged. And so for every one of our ministry areas, we ask them to, work through, hey, what are those things that are absolutely essential to take place in the worship ministry, in the kids ministry, in the student ministry, in guest services? What are the things that are priorities? And what I mean by that is that in some campuses, as we're starting a campus and they're starting in a school and they start with 300 people, they have 50 kids in their ministry, and they don't really have a midweek space yet. A priority is that at some point they're working towards building a kids ministry to where they're able to provide an Awana program, which is a Bible memorization kind of program. But that, so it's not essential because there's some limiting factors to it. You've got to have some critical mass. You've got to have a space to do it. So that's the P in priorities. And then the O are things that are optional. And, I kind of joke and I say, student ministry, you can choose whether you're going to order pizza or you're going to do hot dogs, so there's some optional things. Curriculum is not optional, but how they run an event is optional. And then D are things that are just discouraged or essentially not allowed. The tools like that have helped us kind of maintain the DNA and the vision, the values across the campuses. The other thing I'd say is that we place a high value on our campus pastors, and our campus pastors are really the DNA carriers at the campus level, and so we invest heavily in them and really want to see them lead their campuses the way that JD would lead.
Shout out Glenwood at Seacoast.
Yes.
That's fantastic. That's so simple to understand. And I assume that acronym, those things, there's probably been some stability over the years, but there's also been some flux. Like this used to be in one category, now it's in another. We're always kind of holding things somewhat loosely, giving some framework, but open to change if something feels like it needs to be in a different category.
Right. Yes. Yeah, we call it a working document, and we, kind of review it every 2 years, kind of refresh it. And that's a kind of a collaborative effort with the central leader of that ministry area and the counterparts at the campuses. Campus pastors are involved to a certain level of some of those things. So it is a very extensive, kind of ongoing work.
Obviously, Summit is huge into church planting, something that, I'm really proud of. I know you're proud of and feel honored to be a small part of. What would you mind telling us about that? I'd love to hear about the church planting culture generally, kind of this send your best ethos. And if you want to drill down into like how that impacts XPs and what we're doing to build up XPs, I'd love to hear about that as well.
Sure. Yeah. This kind of birthed out of just a desire to send people overseas, and then recognized that there was also a need to plant churches nationally. And that it started with us just latching on to a couple guys that we were loosely connected to. And, we gave them money. We sent some teams to go do short-term work with them. And then quite frankly, we kind of claimed them as one of our church plants at that time. We were like, hey, this is our guy. We're going to invest in him. And it just kind of caught fire within our church and breathed life into, and vision for our church. And so from there, we started developing a little bit more. I mean, now I'd say it's pretty robust, but started taking steps to developing a church planting kind of arm of our ministry. And so we hired a guy to lead our Summit Network at that time is what we called it. We planted a couple churches. Our first church plant was out in Denver, Colorado. We're blessed to be right here by Southeastern. And so we were able to find some guys there. But he came and he spent 9 months on our staff, and we trained him as best as we knew how at that time. And then we gave him free reign to recruit a team. And that very first year, I mean, there were somewhere between 30 and 40 people standing on stage from our church, some of our very best, some of our leaders, some of our most generous, and they were standing on stage getting ready to move to Denver, Colorado. And all of us were just like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? But since then, we've had the privilege of sending out, over 1,000 people from our church, have over 100 church plants, in our Summit Collaborative is what we call it now. And it's just been one of the greatest things we've, seen God do. And something we could not have imagined. But I think it's just God's favor on us holding our hands open and saying, Lord, we want to see you move in ways that we could not do ourselves. And so it's just been exciting to see. We now have a Summit Collaborative team, a whole team of people that are leading that. And so we've got a residency program right now. This year, we're sending out 15 church plants. Last year, we actually launched another collaborative within the collaborative so that we can see the multiplication just take place even faster. And so the effort within the collaborative for executive pastors is, I recognized probably about 3 years ago that there was a lot of effort given towards recruiting and training the lead pastor, but the lead pastor was oftentimes scrambling to find somebody to go along with him and serve in this kind of executive pastor role. And so I went to them and said, hey, I'd love to help lead the collaborative, collaborative executive pastor conference. And I'd love to start kind of a farm system for raising up future executive leaders. And so that's something that we've just started. It's pretty new, but about a year now, we've been running that with 8 people on our staff who, it was kind of a collaborative effort to identify 8 people who we see have the potential to be executive leaders. And I told them, I said, hey, we're praying that some of you who are our very best young leaders, we're praying that God sends some of you out to go with some of our church plants. And I even sent them a job description from one of our church plants up in Virginia and said, hey, this might be for one of you. So just pray about it. And if you're interested, then let's talk. So we've really tried to embrace the sending, and it's hard and painful at times. You're sending out, not only some of your best, but some of your very best friends. And, but for the kingdom, it's worth it.
Man, it's so good. It's one of my favorite things about Summit. It is so counterintuitive. It's so not our natural proclivity to send out our very best. Whether it's money or people or whatever. I mean, there's just this natural propensity to kind of hoard it for yourself because based out of fear, right? That there's not going to be enough. And so I love that about Summit, and just the doubling down on it too. We saw what happened once at the very beginning, kind of as you talked about, and then like, man, let's do that again and keep putting more faith in God and testing him and seeing what he'll do. It's really remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's look back, man, over the last 20 years. I know you're not good at talking about yourself or bragging on yourself, but, is there anything that you would point to either for yourself or the church where you're like, man, I'm really proud of this. I think we've done this really well. And then conversely, if you're comfortable, is there something that you were like, hey, we really missed on this, or I wish we would have done it differently? Some sort of lesson learned that would benefit the larger executive pastor audience?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are lots of things that I would say that we're proud of, anywhere from church planting to, our college ministry is just top notch, and seeing the movement of God in our college ministry, and just feeling like, man, we're getting to witness a revival on, University of Chapel Hill and NC State, and the beginnings of things at Duke and North Carolina Central, and so there's pride in that, in the sense that we're just in awe of what God's doing, and we have tried to just pour fuel on that fire, and that comes from resources, personnel, stories, energy, all the things that come with that. And so I'd say that's one of the things that we've been really proud of.
Yeah.
The things that I think that we have not done as well probably fall more in line with kind of the business side of things. And that is, we kind of stumbled through our way with some of our real estate and financial things that are involved in that. Probably didn't make the most wise decisions early on, and just didn't seek out the right counsel on some decisions, and didn't have the right ministry partners, and so that's why, I mean, I know you're the one hosting this, but partners like you all, like our construction firm now, like somebody like Slingshot, who I'm not trying to be, and I'm not getting paid for any kind of advertisement, but I think ministry partners, key ministry partners, who are skilled in specific areas, kind of partnering with them in strategic ways would have saved us a lot of money, a lot of heartache. And so that's kind of my short answer to
I appreciate you sharing that. It ties into something I talk about a lot with executive pastors is, oftentimes when you're in the early stages of a church, whether it's the church plant with no money or you're coming along with your budget and you're more of a medium-sized church, there's this propensity to kind of use friends and family for everything, to build the website, to do the construction, to do the legal, to do the everything, right? Because they're trusted, it's maybe they'll do it for free or they'll do it for a discount, and that works. And look, I'm big on that, because every dollar you don't spend on the vendor goes back into the front end ministry, which is great. At the same time, there is a point, and I'm not exactly sure where it is. I think it's up for debate. I think maybe somewhere between a $1 and $3 million budget, but like where you kind of have to professionalize the function. Like it just doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's really valuable for XPs to hear.
Well, I mean, I could go on forever with the mistakes we made, but that's top of the line.
We'll land there. So let's talk about personal disciplines. I'm sure folks are interested. I mean, you've been in this role a good bit of time. There's some longevity and sustainability there. There's a lot of pressure with what you do, and for the executive pastor role generally, sometimes little formal spotlight. So what habits or disciplines have helped you with long-term sustainability, clarity, health, personal wellness?
Yeah, I would say I haven't always done this well, and there's always room to improve. But some of the things, as I've walked with you through this over the last 5 years, that I kind of went through my version of burnout and went to see a counselor, and his recommendation was take a sabbatical. And I just thought, man, I'm not against sabbaticals. We've never really done them here, but those that do them, great. But I just felt like for me, I would probably enjoy a sabbatical. It would probably be really good for me.
Hmm.
And I'd probably come back rested. But I felt like in my gut, I felt like 6 months from now, I'd be back in the exact same situation. And I wanted to change things for the long haul. And some of that, crossing over 50, just recognizing, I want to go for another 15 years in this role, Lord willing, and I want to create some rhythms and habits that allow me to do that. And so that's looked like just evaluating things like relationships, work, family, physical, my spiritual disciplines, those types of things. And so I went through an exercise with my counselor to say, okay, I'm not going to take a sabbatical, but let's dial some things back and let's, create some rhythms and habits that are going to help me sustain for the long haul. And so, one example of that for work is I've now employed I use, and I've talked with you about this, but I use inbox pause. And so my inbox doesn't, no new email comes in until 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
And so there's just a lack, and then it shuts off at now. Honestly, it shuts off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It keeps getting shorter and shorter. And so my new email that I'm dealing with takes place between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And what that allows me to do is it slows down my morning, and I'm able to, linger a little bit longer with the Lord in my time with him. I'm able to exercise and not feeling this angst about, man, the emails are piling up, because I know they are piling up, but there's nothing I can do about it because I can't see them.
Right.
And so at 9 o'clock, I get in and I, start dealing with it. And then the reason I pushed it back till 3 o'clock in the afternoon is because I recognized that it was going to take me an hour or so to wrap up kind of the day as best as I could. And my desire, and this is what I was not doing well, my desire is to be able to go home and be at home, be present with my kids, with my wife, and
Your dog.
and so, and my dog now. So it's helped me. It's just kind of created some boundaries and helped me kind of focus on things. And so that one thing has led to better time with the Lord in the morning. It's led to a more consistent workout routine. And it's also helped me on the back end in terms of, being present and less consumed by work when I'm at home.
That is so good, man. Number one, thank you for mentioning the C word. Thank you for saying counseling out loud in an evangelical context. I think that's helpful. And then two, yes, you introduced me to inbox pause. I don't know if you remember this story. I implemented it, although mine was a cutoff at 5 p.m. And like the first day I did it, I literally almost called my IT department between 5 and 6 because I forgot that I'd done it. And I was like, what happened to my emails? I was so dependent on those emails coming in and that jolt of cortisol that I'm like, what is happening? But anyway, I don't know when you introduced that to me, probably 2 years ago now, or maybe a year ago, but it's something that's still on my inbox. It's a 9 to 5 thing for me. And I'm really grateful for that. And I mean, you want to go a little bit deeper here. Talk to me about the fear, though. I mean, and I'm not asking you to indict someone at Summit, but the fear is someone's going to say, where's David? Why can't I get an email from David at 8 o'clock in the morning? Why can't I, if I send David an email at 3:01 and he doesn't respond by 5, like talk about that. And how that tone, maybe some communication you've had with JD about that or not, do you feel like the church, the leadership has your back in that, or how do we balance that with fighting for urgency? Because there is some level of urgency in every organization.
Right, right. And I do think that's a little bit of culture, and it definitely requires some communication. So if your culture says, hey, if you get an email during the day, it's a 2 hour turnaround time, then that would not work well.
Yeah.
Our culture is, basically respond to emails within 24 hours,
Yeah.
and so I'm not missing the window of time within the cultural expectations of email. If there's but our culture also says that email is not the method of communication for the most immediate response. If it requires immediate response, then a text message or a phone call
Yeah.
is oftentimes. And so I will get at times I'll get text messages that say, hey, I just sent you a critical email. I need you to respond within the next hour.
Yeah.
And that's great. I can handle that. And I can get into my inbox. I just have to, go through a few clicks to open up my inbox after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But it is possible to do that. And so I do think and the communication is just saying I've communicated that to my boss.
Yeah.
And I've also communicated that to the steering team. And so they kind of know this is how I operate.
Yeah.
And so I think both those things are critical.
I love it, man. It's super gold. I hope XPs are listening up, and I'm really grateful that, you introduced it to me. Inbox Pulse people should be sending you and I both a check for all the promotion they're getting right now. But man, it's so good. All right. To quote our mutual friend, Brian Loritz, rounding third, headed for home. If you only had 15 minutes to sit down with an XP who's on the front end of their career, and you can only share one thing, what would it be?
Well, I tell people that, especially early on, but I think this is from day one all the way to where I am, 20 years later, that you are responsible for your growth. And, so that requires a level of discipline in terms of seeking the Lord, lingering with him, not allowing your time with the Lord to just be something you check your box on, but on a daily basis, coming before him and, just delighting in his presence. And so you're kind of responsible for that kind of growth, but also to seek out the opportunities for professional growth. And so whether that's, just seeking out great books to read, great cohorts to be a part of, other peers that you can learn from, ministry partners that you can latch arms with, those types of things. I think that's probably the thing I would try to impress the most is that, your growth is dependent upon you.
Yeah. Very good, man. Well, thank you for saying yes to this. I am so grateful for our friendship. I am really grateful for our professional relationship, but it's like 0.1% compared to the 99.99 personal friendship that I'm grateful for. You have walked with me through some very difficult times, literally and figuratively walking around our neighborhood, and then figuratively just over some time and some hard periods. And I'm just really grateful for that, man, that you have every excuse in the world to be busy and not be present. Yet I have not felt that. I've felt the exact opposite. You've been Jesus's hands and feet with me. And I'm really grateful for you and your family, the way that you've modeled being a husband and a dad and loved my kids so well. I'm just extremely grateful.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
So, David, if XPs want to get in touch with you, how would you suggest they do that?
I'm happy for them to email me, and my email is david@summitchurch.com. And so I'm happy to reach back out to them. It will not be before 9 a.m. or after 3 p.m., but I'd be happy to back out to them.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I'm extremely grateful for executive pastors that love the church. If something from today's conversation resonated with you, encouraged you, challenged you, or reminded you that you're not alone in this role, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or share this with another executive pastor or leader who came to mind while you were listening. And be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every listen, share, subscription, and comment helps build stronger executive pastors and moves the church forward.